Hello, this is Mindra Chen. In this lecture, we're going to continue our discussion of some classic management theory and the emergent one. And let me first point out one additional video that I just found, which pretty much summarize some of the classic early management theory that we have discussed. And please watch the video. And one thing that we did not discuss, but it's discussed in this video as part of the classic management theory, is Max Weber's theory on bureaucracy. And certainly we nowadays give bureaucracy a kind of a negative connotation. However, Weber's considered bureaucracy can be a very efficient way of managing a large organization. And so let's move on. Last time we kind of studied some classic theories, including Henry Fayol's 14th principle, Frederick Taylor's scientific management. However, there are some limitations of this early management theorists, the theories they have developed. They tend to, not intentionally, I don't think it's intentionally, but it tends to focus on the task, and which as a result kind of dehumanized the workers. And also they tend to focus on manual labor force. As we know, we're moving towards more office automation, factory automation with the support of machinery, computer systems. So please read this short article by Peter Drucker's knowledge worker. Drucker, which is considered father of the modern management, kind of coined a term called knowledge workers. And this is dramatically changing how we manage, and so please read this article. However, the knowledge worker, which we can consider, they are the people who work at a much higher level with their knowledge. It's really not a new phenomenon. Here I'm quoting a Asian Chinese philosophers called Mengzi or Mencius. In his book called The Works of Mencius, he stated that some people labor with their minds and some labor with their strength or their muscle. And those who labor with the mind, which nowadays we may call them managers, govern others, which means their worker. Those who labor with their muscle or strength, which we refer to as worker, are governed by others, by their manager. And those who govern, which means managers, are supported by the value created by their workers. So they are really supporting each other. And although we usually consider managers are higher up in the hierarchy, but we should pay respect to both managers who labor with their mind and people who labor their strengths, because they all contribute to the overall goal of an organization. And we're kind of moving towards the behavior school of management, sometimes called human relationship school. And the groundbreaking studies that kind of started this human relationship school is called Hawthorne's studies. Hawthorne's study was originally conducted by two scholars, Mayald and Ross Lisberger, who examined the impact of lighting in a Western electric Hawthorne work plan. And Hawthorne work is the name of the plant from 1924 to 1932. And however, they didn't find actually the lighting has any significant impact to the productivity of the worker. But carefully go back to their notes, research notes, they found out that the interaction among the co-worker and the worker with the manager actually has more significant impact of the performance of the workers. And so this kind of launched kind of social psychological aspects of human behavior studies in organizations. And the psychologist Frederick Hansberg kind of followed this line of research, argued that there's a critical difference that exists between factors that motivate work, including the recognition, the responsibility, and the personal growth, which do provide great incentive for people to work probably happier and more productively in their job. And there are also some factors such as salary, benefit, and work condition that also may help to motivate people, but they are really just try to make sure people are not unhappy. It may not actually improve the productivity that much. And please watch this documentary. There's a long version. I highly recommend you study the long version of the Hawthorne study. They actually, it's a well-documented documentary that kind of explain the study. There's a short reading with the same reference to this long version of the video that you can study quickly. And certainly our textbook describe the Hawthorne study in detail as well. And please watch another video. This actually is a more recently conducted research, very similar to the traditional one. However, they actually come to a slightly different conclusion. I would ask you what's the new finding in this new updated study related to the traditional Hawthorne's effect. In the 1670, the contingency theory emerged. It started with the study of leadership style. And the result can be generalized to state as the following, that there are different types of management or leadership style that are better in different situations, which means you really need to look at the a variety of contingency factors, such as the type of task, the culture of the organizations, and national culture, and the number of factors to decide what approach or what theory may be considered a better one. And for instance, in general, in the stable situation with little change, the classic theory that we discussed, like Taylorism, may work the best. In situation where much change, then the behavior theory management works best. And this is courtesy once again by Professor Dylan Cooper. Now come to Peter Drucker, who is considered the father of modern management. Drucker is a prolific writer, has written, I believe, like 23 books. And he's well regarded, and he believed that we should empower people by involving everyone in decision making, and we should eliminate bureaucratic rules or any condition that's humiliating people in the organization. We should celebrate and recognize employees for their contribution. That's kind of go without saying. And also it is important to develop a vision that actually inspire people within the organization. A manager should lead by example. And Drucker is the one that promote the idea that management should be treated as a liberal art. It's a liberal art discipline, and the reason he referred to management as a liberal art because liberal in itself and deal with the fundamental knowledge and also self-knowledge. Know yourself, know your capability, potential, the use of your own wisdom and the leaderships. The art portion of the liberal art, because it emphasizes practice and applications. And when managers are facing problems, they need to, Drucker actually believe that the manager should draw on all the knowledge and the insight that he or she may have gained regarding humanity and the from social science. Use psychology, philosophy, economic, and history, and ethics, and or even physical science, all knowledge from various disciplines, and eventually they need to focus on how to use such knowledge to produce effective result. And that's kind of Drucker's belief. And I strongly recommend you to watch this video. It's a movie, actually, fortunately online on YouTube. The movie runs about 2 hours and a half. After 2 hours and 26 minutes or so, it kind of looped back to the beginning. So kind of stop around there. I will create either assignment or as part of the midterm to ask you some question regarding the movie. The movie was really based on a novel in Japan called What If a Female Manager of a High School Baseball Team Read Drucker's Management. The Drucker's book on management is, the full title is Management, Task, Responsibility, and Practice, published in 1973. And this young girl who was in a situation has to actually lead a high school baseball team as a manager, and inspired by the lesson from Drucker's book. So I will ask you a question like, what had the main characters learned from Drucker, and also ask you to reflect based on the movie what you have learned from the movie related to the management topic that we'll discuss. So stay tuned. This will show up as assignment or part of the midterm exam. But take your time to think about the question that's been asked here and while you're watching the movie, and take your time, and hopefully you enjoy the movie. And there's a little story that I like a lot, and you can find out the context of this actually story from a Harvard Business Review article. There's a link here. It's written by Clayton Christensen. Roughly speaking, Professor Christensen is well known for disruptive technology, disruptive innovation, and Intel's CEO Andy Grove at that time was told by a good friend of him that should pay attention to his book and model, and so he called him up and asked him to come to Intel to give a talk. So he came in, and the Andy Grove say, hey, something happened. I can only give you 10 minutes, but Professor Christensen from Harvard So he definitely needs more than 10 minutes when they ask for 30 minutes to explain the model. Okay. And this is the important part, because only with it as a context, okay, then it will make sense to Intel if they want to apply the model. So they need to understand the context of the theory. Remember, we mentioned the contingency theory. There is factor that a lot of theory depends on to make it work. It's the context. It's part of the context. So after Clayton Christensen kind of explained the theory for about 10 minutes, that Andy Grove pretty much, and by the way, Professor Christensen didn't actually use semiconductor industry, which is where the Intel is part of. And he used totally a different industry. I believe he used like steel industry. And to kind of describe how disruptive technology may work. So by the time kind of he finished his description of the theory and the model using the steel industry's case, that Andy Grove kind of responded and said, okay, I get it, and start explaining what he think Intel should do. I believe what Intel ended up doing is actually to launch a microprocessor called Celeron, which is considered a more entry level, maybe for laptop computer. At that time, they have a more high-end product called Pentium. And this is actually to fend out maybe the low-end competitor like AMD. In a sense, Andy Grove came up with a solution based on the theory presented. Clayton Christensen did not actually tell Intel or Andy Grove what they should do. If you're smart enough, if you think hard enough, and whatever model, which may looks actually pretty simple on surface, you may be able to come up with something that can help you or your organization to be more competitive and to be more successful. That's kind of a lesson that at least I learned from this story. And this article is called "How Would You Measure Your Life?" It's highly recommended. And somewhere in this article, at the beginning, there's a story, and I felt this story is very important. So in a sense, to summarize it, the only way you can learn about any management theory is by applying it. Only when you apply and practice what you learn, then you will learn it. And in the early 80s, Tom Peters and his colleague Robert Waterman wrote a very popular trade book. I call it trade book. It's not a textbook. Called "In Search of Excellence." There are some criticism of this book because some people later found that the finding may not be that scientific in a sense, or really based on solid empirical research. However, some of the concepts and idea presented in the book can be still useful, and by comparing to some of the traditional classic theory. And for instance, in Search of Excellence in the book, they promote more action-oriented approach. That is really try to avoid bureaucratic control. And they argue that we should be try to close to our customer, to learn from the customer, to serve the customer based on their needs. And also we should give various units the autonomy to have this kind of startup spirits in order to foster the innovation within the organization or as a startup business. And they strongly argue that productivity comes from people, not just machinery. And they also emphasize more hands-on, value-driven approach. And this is kind of a management philosophy. And this is the first time we kind of use the term called management philosophy. At the end of the day, I do personally believe that what is really driving managers' behavior is really based on their philosophy about management, and very in a very conceptual level. And eventually, it's come down to the kind of theory or model they subscribe to based on their own philosophy. And another point is sticking to the knitting, which really means that as the company grows and try to expand, they suggest that the company should stay with the business they know, which means you do want to make sure you have the right domain knowledge, the industry-specific domain knowledge. That's critical. If you don't have the domain-specific knowledge, then you should hire people who is that domain knowledge to help you with. Otherwise, it's doomed to fail. And they also argue kind of a more lean approach with simpler forms, organizational form or lean staffing, and to try to get things done partially because we do have technology that allowed us to do more with less. And the other thing is this can reduce once again some of the unnecessary side effect of bureaucratic organizations. And they also argue simultaneous loose and tight property in terms of maybe give shop floor some autonomy, while at the central headquarters that you do some centralized planning or centralized value as it's referred to here. And the last one is kind of tricky. It referred to manage ambiguity and paradox. And sometimes within the organization, particularly in the very dynamic situations, that things are very fuzzy, a lot of uncertainty, and so we need to learn to deal with ambiguity. And sometimes we may have conflicting thoughts that tends to be kind of confronting each other, and however they may stimulate each other to come up with better solution. So this is really what this the last point is about, is manage ambiguity and the paradox. And this kind of concludes the essence laid out in this book called In Search of Excellence. Okay, we will continue the last part of this lecture on the traditional management theory next time. Thank you.